And welcome in, everybody. We're excited for a big decision today. Yesterday was a huge IPO win for Figma. And today we're going to dive in on, well, what's next? We're going to go through some deep analysis on a key decision for Figma and look at what AI's perspective is on it and unpack that and look at it from really all the different angles that are coming up here. So, today, we've got a really high stakes decision. This is a very fast moving market. We're going to break down and give you all the context that you need for this to see if Figma is going to make the right call here. And yeah, this could be a big one, either a major acquisition or a major miss within the tech area. And we're going to get into the details of why that all is. So, first, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. So, Arnold Engel, I am built out a AI for decision making and have a lot of experience in Silicon Valley, having been an entrepreneur across several different ventures, raised over $40 million of venture capital, and previously worked at McKinsey. So I've really seen all sorts of aspects of corporate decision making and strategy, and I'm really excited to break down this with you today. So we're going to start with a little bit of context here. Thanks to the folks at Perplexity for putting together a lot of in-depth financial research to make this a little bit easier. And first, we'll start with why we're talking at all about acquisition and why that's on the mind of Figma. So yesterday, their CEO, it was reported, Dylan Field, made some comments around the IPO, explicitly stating that Figma is focused on growth and is ready to take big swings, in quotes, big swings when it comes to M&A as the company goes public. He later clarified, and I'm quoting, "My intention is to do things when it comes to scaled M&A. Not all the gaps we have will be filled with us building or buying. Some of them will be partnerships." I wanted to call that out and goes into it a little bit more deeply. We'll hold a high bar for what and when we do it. We will be prudent. It has to be an amazing team, an amazing asset consistent with our culture. So lays the groundwork, but on the day of an IPO, he is talking about acquisition. Um, and hard to understate the success of yesterday's IPO for Figma, just in terms of capturing a narrative and a story. And even though they raised a relatively small amount of money within the IPO, just in terms of the size of the company overall, it did kind of create a lot of energy and, dare I say, kind of good vibes around the company for it to just have that much momentum and show that they were a really valuable story for Wall Street. So coming on the back of a very successful day yesterday. So let's dive a little bit into Lovable and some of the context that we fed to the AI. They've been on a real tear as well. Lovable is based in Sweden and Stockholm. They really kind of led people's imagination in terms of vibe coding. And there are some others in the space, and we'll get into that and how those other players play in that dynamic. But relatively small in terms of employee base. There's 45 employees, generating now over what they claim is $100 million of annual recurring revenue. And we'll dive in a little bit deeper in exactly what that means in Lovable's case here. But they've grown very, very quickly, and they've been able to achieve all of that in under a year since launching. I believe that launch happened in November of 2024, where things started to kind of accelerate for Lovable. So tremendous growth, and they recently became a unicorn and being valued at over $1 billion in a recent funding led by Excel. So that's the background on some of the folks involved here, and I want to dive right into some of the questions that the AI really had here in trying to assess what the right decision is for Figma. So should Figma acquire Lovable? Here are the questions that the AI came back with to better make that decision. So first and foremost, it asks, is there something in Lovable's technology that is proprietary or unique capabilities that would take Figma more than 18 months to replicate internally. Why this matters, according to the AI, is it really just testing whether this acquisition provides some sort of genuine technological advantage versus simply buying market access and the roughly 2 million or so users that are on Lovable today, of which I think are a little less than 10% are actually paying customers. So right away, the AI is getting into kind of how proprietary is what Lovable has from a tech perspective and what's behind the scenes there. It thinks that the more proprietary Lovable's tech is and more difficult to replicate, the more that shifts towards acquisition as more of a strategic necessity for Figma. If not, and these things can be copied relatively easily, that would, strengthen recommendation to just develop some of those capabilities that Figma is lacking internally and focus on that. So I think a good question, and really one of the first things that AI is coming back with to look at that would really sway the decision, not on the margin, but I think pretty fundamental. My take on this specifically is I think the timeline is wrong. I think given that the AI has obviously ingested a lot of information in its up to its cutoff date for training, that is obviously more backward looking. I think in tech right now, things are obviously moving very, very quickly. So 18 months feels like an eternity. It's difficult to kind of think about what we were all talking about from a tech perspective 18 months back from now. And I think things are only seeming to accelerate within AI. So that would be something I would really look at. Is I think the decision here is more in the kind of 6-month range rather than 18 months in terms of replication, because if it takes you kind of 6 months to build something out, the game might be over already at that point. The second question the AI has here is, are more than 15% of Figma's new professional users in the last 12 months coming from Lovable's user base? So interesting, it's pulling at what is the kind of flow maybe from a more consumer or non-designer, let's say, using Lovable and then moving into Figma as they look to kind of professionalize maybe the app that they were building, or do more, or move it kind of more into something that feels a little bit more production ready, perhaps. And if yes, so if most, more than 15% of Figma's user base that's new is actually coming from Lovable, or maybe others like Lovable, then that makes this more of a defensive priority to kind of protect your user pipeline, as opposed to, if not, it might hamper a lot of the rationale for Figma acquiring Lovable, and might strengthen more of your argument to keep focused if you are Figma. So really interesting that it's focusing pretty quickly on what is the pipeline, and how is Figma's user base growth driven by the developments with Lovable. The last question that it comes back with is, would acquiring Lovable require Figma to maintain it as a separate brand and product with dedicated resources? And if yes, well, that significantly strengthens the case against acquisition due to complexity costs. If not, it would make it less of a concern around integration, but would still kind of require some sort of clear consolidation strategy. So this is getting really at like how easy it is to ingest Lovable, and given maybe the brand that Lovable has built out with it, how would that kind of play with Figma? Would that be something that could be an asset here, or maybe cause more of a distraction, let's say, than a help, given where Figma is today? So those are some of the key questions and areas that the AI is really coming into. And I think that's pretty helpful overall. I can share a little bit of additional context here from our research, and where I think the AI might be going in that direction, but maybe not following all the way through. Just in terms of integration, Figma has offices in London, Paris, and Berlin. So presumably acquiring a company with 45 awesome engineers, designers, product leaders that is based in Stockholm. I'm not sure actually if this is a positive or a negative. It would be interesting. Folks might want to comment in it how you view that. Um, it's likely something where Figma already is experienced in operating in Europe and already has a portion of its team there, while headquartered still in San Francisco. So this does kind of increase its global footprint for it, but they wouldn't really be totally on an island. And there's a lot to respect about what the team at Lovable has built, their product sense and direction, and how they've also managed to kind of grow the brand in a consumer area. So I think that there's a lot of positives that could come out of that aspect of it. So that's one element of just kind of this integration question, which is always there. And I think maybe more significant because there's probably not, um, maybe like you could see it either way in it, quite frankly, and that's helpful to understand and unpack. Let's go into some of the other key decision factors that the AI is coming up with, and I'll try to give my take as well on this. So it's seeing there's about a 60x valuation differential between Figma and Lovable. So right now, it seems Figma is trading right around the $60 billion mark, or was a little bit earlier this morning when I checked. And Lovable just got valued at $1 billion. So let's just take those as given for the moment. So there is kind of a very big gap and difference there, while both of them are still growing quickly. And the other key decision factor that it's pulling out is it sees that there are some potential network effects from consumer to professional user funnel. So the idea being that, yes, you have your typical like consumer who doesn't consider themselves to be, let's say, a designer or professional that wants to use Lovable to make a website with additional types of functionality, let's say for their small business, or they want to try something out with friends and family. That is a very different person than someone who feels like they are, let's say, really interested in user experience design, have worked at that professionally, the core kind of user in the past for Figma. And so how these different network effects are coming together really is driven by what you think of the future, let's say, for Figma, of who the designers in the future down the road are going to be, right? Do you want to kind of really triple and quadruple down on folks that really would consider themselves to be professional in the field? Or do you kind of look at this as there might be a way to kind of create these interesting network effects where informal designers, if you will, or people that might not have considered themselves designers in the past are getting into this, and you're really growing what the addressable market is. And I almost think about this as you have your, if you had a kind of 2 by 2 matrix of it, you could have your kind of casuals and your professionals, and you might also on the other axis have your kind of engineer and your designer, right? So there are, as you kind of think about that matrix, different players are looking to claim territory and kind of win that area. Lovable seems to be initially really positioning as casual and designer, and kind of being in that space. It's not geared in terms of some of the positioning. And I also say, as someone who's used Lovable extensively on and off for different projects and tested it out, I think it does give you some of that feel of, oh, I can kind of design things. I have some, control without feeling like I'm a professional designer. Um, and then, in the other aspects of this, I think Figma is really strong in the pro designer, right? They have clearly marked and claimed that territory. So they do sit in different boxes here. As well, there are, I think more engineering driven tools in their marketing. I would say, well, I have less experience with them. Bolt, for example, which is seemingly by public information, quite a bit smaller than Replit and Lovable. They seem to play kind of within that uh, more in the engineer space of building the app kind of more from an engineer perspective. And I'd say Replit also has a little bit of that look and feel. Now, some of those lines might start to blur, but as you kind of see where the territory is mapping and where that's being drawn, I think that's a way to kind of visualize some of this stuff for it. And so the AI is really zeroing in on kind of some of those network effects and how you might be able to kind of move around those spaces with it. So I think the I want to talk through a few things that are kind of additional background for the decision here and kind of additional context. So one thing that I don't think the AI necessarily picked up on or didn't explicitly mention, but did when I was searching through kind of news on Perplexity, was there was actually a cease and desist letter sent by Figma to Lovable. And that was in regards to a trademark dispute over dev mode, which I didn't think was trademarked. Just as an aside, I didn't think that was trademarked or trademarkable. But they sent anyway. They said they tried to enforce that and sent a cease and desist letter to Lovable, and I believe that was back in the kind of March, April timeline. Just looking here, there's an article on this at April 15th or so. So uh, it's unclear whether that was ever pursued any further or really there was any much animosity there, or if that really was just a perfunctory making sure that we send a cease and desist to kind of protect either that trademark or other trademarks that we have. We might not know that kind of full story around it, but that's still what you'd call like a nasty gram, not a loving loving letter to get or otherwise, and maybe that there's some element of that could be within the consideration here, of just what's the relationship between these CEOs, and is that something that would set up a really good, clear, easy integration, lots of respect back and forth, or might make this a little bit more difficult to kind of think of and go through. The other aspects is uh, I don't think there is as much consideration from the AI on the market dynamics here and the other players. So I'll go through some of that. It's something I would be, if I give you my take, I would be thinking about as lot. So we mentioned Bolt, which from public information I've seen looks like they were doing $40 million in ARR in March. But there hasn't been anything publicly reported that I've seen since then. So presumably not at the $100 million ARR, and therefore not the leader. Replit is a bit over $100 million ARR and was recently valued at a $3 billion valuation. So that I would say both Replit and Lovable seem to be kind of vying for that leadership position. Perhaps unless there's other information out there, perhaps that's not the case for Bolt. And so those sorts of dynamics I think are at play to some degree when you consider an acquisition. You have to also think about on the other side of it, okay, those are the three players that might be in this space that could allow Figma to potentially build a nice pipeline for very casual, um, let's say casual users, people that would be more within the focus of Lovable, to make it very approachable. I will say, as a longtime user of Figma, and then somebody that has also had a couple different projects on Lovable and really seen that experience. Lovable is an easier on ramp to design for someone who is casual, who might not want to really, or might feel like it's a little bit harder to kind of get into all of the details. Now, of course, there's a lot more that you can do within Figma, but in terms of getting something going and being able to feel like you can express your vision on the screen, I think Lovable does a very good job with that. And so being able to kind of create that pathway from a casual user into somebody that can really take something into production and really feel like, hey, this is exactly what I want to represent. This is how I want it to look. I think there's a gap that Figma has to fill that would unlock more value. And I think in a lot of the IPO roadshow and run up to the IPO for Figma, I noticed a lot of the branding and positioning was more around kind of bringing more people into the fold as designers and making design something that is more approachable to the general public. I think I saw one of their early investors, I believe, was talking about a story where the CEO of Figma was kind of making comments in the IPO roadshow that all the bankers, investment bankers, and investors, like, they did a demo to that group of Figma's product in much more depth than I think typically would be done in an IPO roadshow. And part of his reasoning was that, like, these sorts of people will eventually be designers as well, and using tools like Figma. Um, and that's a bold statement, right? IPO bankers are not necessarily hanging out at coffee shops in Brooklyn, let's say, or otherwise. So that if you have that kind of an aspiration for the market, you might really want to think about how can you make it as easy to kind of get into that sort of design experience as possible, and that's really where Lovable has focused in. I think the other aspect that uh, there weren't any visual inputs to this question when we asked the Herringbone AI model about it. Um, Purely just text and text context for it. But I think if you had seen visuals for this might, in some sense, inform an acquisition discussion. And without getting too touchy feely about it, if you just look at the websites and logos of Figma, Lovable on one side, and then separately Replit and Bolt, you will notice something right away, right? The Replit and Bolt, they go for the dark mode. They seem to be more focused on engineering, just in terms of the aesthetic that you have. It speaks much more to, okay, this is a product for engineers or people that are getting into engineering or have some engineering knowledge and want to spin something up quickly, want to prototype, want to get in there with something. That's what the brand is communicating. That's the feel, that's the quote unquote vibe. Whereas when you look at Lovable and Figma, they both tend to use, like anything from the rainbow color scheme to the heart type logo for Lovable. It seems like they are very much on the same wavelength in terms of branding and positioning, which I do find interesting. And I think that through line that they're trying to is design. They're separate in that Figma is kind of going for design by designers in how it was initially positioned, whereas Lovable, I think, is going towards build something cool, feel like you are a designer and a builder, but that for the really casual audience with that. So I think there's a big element of that might inform some of that information. Obviously, the AI was not taking into account that specifically in how it was assessing it. So I want to pick up on a couple of other key insights it has, and then we'll get to the bottom line for what the AI thinks, and then I'll give you my take on it overall as well. So it highlights, as it always does, it tries to throw up what are some of the primary risks here in this decision and how could you mitigate them. So the biggest risk it comes back with would be a dilution of strategic focus for Figma. So it has clearly done very well to get to this point by being relatively focused and having what you could call kind of very high conviction, knowing what they want to build, knowing what direction they want to go in. It's been the same, CEO and founder all throughout leading this. And that level of strategic focus, avoiding anything that could be seen as like unnecessary market expansion or losing focus or otherwise, is concerned about. Also highlights integration complexity, and lastly focuses in on cognitive biases in decision making. So making sure that there's a real strategic rationale rather than thinking about acquisition as either maybe some sort of fear or envy aspect of it that might be kicking in here. So remember too that the kind of corpus that this AI is trained on, there's a range of different, let's say that the wisdom that has come down over many, many years of, generally speaking, acquisitions don't work well. That is kind of being echoed, it seems, just from its analysis and how it's thinking about the different patterns that it's seeing in this specific case in going through it. So it also finds that there may be uh, a emotional component to these types of decisions rather than kind of more, strategic value. And so it wants to make sure that regardless, like you're going through like a pretty disciplined decision making process on that. So that feels kind of more like standard. Yes, you would say that in kind of every case. I will just give my perspective on this for where we are in this moment and how to kind of be thinking about it. I think there's a little bit that the AI is missing here, just in terms of what the overall dynamics are and why this may make more sense at this moment than maybe in other cases or other places. So, coming off of yesterday, I think it's important to recognize that this is a hot story for Figma. Figma went from coming off of a situation where they were almost acquired by Adobe a couple years back. That deal fell through. Yes, they did get about $1 billion, I believe, in cash that came onto their balance sheet as a result of that deal falling through. But they have a particular experience, let's say, with acquisitions and understanding that. Uh, but they were not as hot a story, and I think right now they clearly are in having such a successful IPO. And so if they had been thinking, let's say in the pre-IPO period as a private company, hey, maybe we should look at doing an acquisition here and getting Lovable before it gets bigger. Like we have the balance sheet where we would be able to acquire here and make that happen. If it had been done pre-IPO as a private, that might have been seen as like more of a sign of weakness. People, I think, would change. The narrative might be, okay, maybe this is a smart thing, but is this just something where it's totally defensive, where Figma's concerned that AI is going to eat its lunch, and so that's why it has to buy Lovable? That could have been part of the narrative. I think that's shifted now, where coming off of a successful IPO, it would be seen more as a narrative of strength of, hey, we're now valued at over $60 billion by the public markets. We have, we are publicly traded, all the aspects and benefits of that sort of liquidity coming with that. And that allows us to build up a bit of a war chest to be able to go out, and if we can acquire something strategically here, it could be, transformative for the business. And I think you're looking, your frame of reference for that would be YouTube, it would be WhatsApp, it would be Instagram, it would be, kind of falling in that mode of, potentially paying, a high price to acquire a fast growing asset that retrospectively, you look back at 5-10 years later, otherwise was so clearly such an amazing decision by the acquirer. The question is, is this something that could fall into that bucket for Figma at this point? So I think uh, and just on the acquisition landscape itself, the other thing that the AI didn't necessarily pick up on or highlight was the potential for defensive considerations here as well. So, in looking at Figma, the two companies that would come to mind as closest to them would be Adobe, which uh, tried to acquire Figma unsuccessfully, and it's sitting with a market cap around 150 billion dollars, or Canva, which is currently private, and I think as best I can tell, their valuation probably went up considerably after Figma's IPO. But let's just say for sake of argument, they're probably somewhere in the $60 billion range if they were valued, you know, at this stage. So two very substantial other players within the design space, and Adobe, I think, would be kind of considered more for professional designers and kind of focused on that box in the quadrant. And then Canva would be focused more on casual designers and focused on that box and success in that area. But I would be thinking as well of like what does the landscape look like if Adobe or Canva stepped in and picked up Lovable at this point? How does that play for Figma? Does that make it harder for them to achieve what they're trying to do? How would they view that situation if that played out? Would they be excited if Adobe, bought Lovable? Would they be excited if Canva bought Lovable? There's probably a lot of discussions that have happened, there, and kind of thinking some of that through. But I would really look at this a little bit more expansively about what other dynamics might happen in the market rather than just looking at this as kind of a static system for it. So let's get into what the bottom line is, right? So what does the AI think you should do? It's really clear. It thinks Figma should not pursue the acquisition of Lovable at this point. So yeah, AI doesn't think Figma should buy Lovable. There, heard it here first, right? So, the risk of diluting strategic focus and disrupting some of the operational excellence that Figma has would outweigh its potential benefits. And it also thinks maintaining a focus on professional tools is critical for sustaining Figma's valuation premium as well. So, yeah, interesting. No equivocation there. It thinks this is a total pass for Figma, probably giving Figma a lot of credit in terms of the ability for it to really develop any of the tech that Lovable has and kind of build out the Figma brand, perhaps to have a better onboard, to kind of continue to extend a bit more into consumer or people that are really junior in their design career, or perhaps in adjacent areas, like, for example, engineers, or obviously product is kind of more natural, but let's say maybe engineers, where they can kind of feel like, okay, Figma speaks some of my language and is a credible kind of professional tool. I use it for some parts of my workflow that actually like help me to do a whole lot more myself, or kind of within my team. And so that, yeah, that's interesting to kind of see it be very clear on it. I think my perspective on it overall is I would have probably been more more open to an acquisition. I also think that if you break this down a little bit further and say, hey, should the as a board, like, should we be looking seriously at this and kicking the tires and having some discussions with Lovable? That's a much lower bar, because I think as an acquirer, clearly Figma has all the resources it needs. It has a pretty strong balance sheet, thanks in part due to the generosity of Adobe. And so, and that puts them in a position where, whereas Lovable, founder led, founder is a huge part of the business, is very relatively small at this point in comparison to the size of and development of Figma. And I think we just saw through the whole OpenAI and Windsurf experience just how devastating, or how convoluted and kind of on shifting sand an acquisition of that, from a much larger party coming into a startup that is still very very nascent in its development, even though the revenue, is there and is pretty substantive. So I think that that element of that might, put you more in the camp of, okay, it's easier for Figma to kind of dip a toe in, have some conversations, see where that could go. Maybe that causes a lot of distraction and Lovable. If you end up kind of competing with them over time, that there could be small advantages gained off of some of that. So that's an element to consider with it. I think the other aspect that wasn't really here, and maybe it's just we're all taking it kind of at face value, but if you think about the annual recurring revenue aspect of this, when you look at that for Figma, for example, and you look through the S1, Figma, is selling, whether they're $90 a seat or, they have different variations of cost per seat, but they are getting a lot of enterprises to commit to buy large packs, and they have a track record going back a number of years that gives you a much better sense of like, okay, what is really annual recurring revenue here? And it feels recurring because it actually has recurred, right? And you've gone through different cycles. You've been able to expand, with the same company, let's say, or otherwise. So you have a lot more certainty around that revenue and a much more kind of established base with it, which tends to make you think that like that should persist. It gives you kind of a stronger base to work with. Lovable, on the other hand, and through no fault of their own, they just haven't been in business for 12 months with a product on the market like this that people are paying for. So the idea of whether how much exactly is annualized recurring revenue that will truly kind of go through a 12-month cycle and then be kind of renewed over otherwise, or even if someone is doing month to month, will they actually use it beyond, let's say, a 12-month period? Uh, you know, that's unclear, right? And it's impossible to kind of guess around that. I'm sure Lovable is being very diligent about looking at their retention cohorts and what they look like for any sorts of early indications of that. But this is just a fast moving area that it's a little bit unclear what, how that's going to shape out, especially as some of these other players work through that. So that could argue more in favor of an acquisition on the part of Figma, just if there is that gives them a little bit more leverage and some sort of negotiation with it. And given the fact that there are, it's interesting just seeing this, really seeing like there's three potential great acquirers, right? Adobe, Canva, and Figma. And then you're kind of have three folks that are really within this vibe coding area: Replit, Bolt, and Lovable. And will be interesting to see, you know, if someone pairs up, if there's multiple people that kind of pair up, what that all looks like, or if, the three acquirers all pass and decide, hey, we can actually build this out ourselves. We've already been building kind of in these areas. We don't need this at all, and everybody kind of fights it out from there. But I do think everybody would be a little bit, from an acquisition standpoint. Lovable has 180,000 paying users. I think Figma, if they were acquiring, would not be so much focused on that, on kind of the revenue boost to them for it. I think they would recognize that there could be some uncertainty there, but the 2 million users who have signed up with Lovable that have accounts in some form or otherwise, that's kind of the indication that, hey, they could help us to grow the market and kind of get into more of this consumer area with it. So yeah, I think the stakes here are really high, because if you wake up one day and another, one of your competitors has made this sort of move, it's either going to be really great for you or could be really, really problematic. We might not know for a while, but unlike, let's say, maybe for YouTube or otherwise, like we might know relatively quickly, just the speed at which the market is moving. This is something that could turn out to be either a great acquisition within a 6-month period, or we'll probably have a sense that like it might not have been the right strategic move for it. So I'm really excited to see all of this come together and understand kind of some of the dynamics here with Figma and Lovable in the space. And yeah, I'm excited to see how this all plays out and what their board is thinking here. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been fun doing this live stream. We're going to do some more of this next week. If you want to follow us on X, we're at Good Call Show and at Good Call Show for YouTube as well. So please like and subscribe and follow us so you can get up to date information on the next live streams that we're doing as we go deep into some of the highest stakes decisions for business and have a clear look at what AI is thinking, how it looks for patterns in it, and I'm always excited to give my take as well. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.